So we all know that whales are intelligent. After all, they have the largest brain of all animal species on the planet, 6 times larger than the human brain in the case of the sperm whale. But how do we define intelligence? What does intelligence even mean? Well, one definition would include the presence and use of a communication system that could be considered a language. Another might be evidence of a complex social interactions that extend beyond immediate family members. As scientists study whales ever more closely with ever more sophisticated research methods and tools, we're learning that whales have both complex social interactions and sophisticated communication systems. Sperm whales, for example, live in female-dominated social networks and segregate into clans of hundreds or thousands of individuals with unique identities that are expressed through various clicking sounds. It's as though each clan is speaking a different dialect of a common language. Humpback whales exhibit a musical culture with songs that apparently evolve and change over time and distance. Can we ever hope to understand their language? Could we ever develop a translation tool? Well, today we're going to explore these questions and more in a moderated discussion with two renowned whale biologists who will not only describe their own research and the culture of whales, but also discuss the Cetacean Translation Initiative, or SETI program. And that's SETI with a C, not an S. And this may well be the most ambitious interspecies communication effort in history. Needless to say, this endeavor has profound implications for the field of astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which is SETI with an S. Our guests will be introduced by Frank Marchese, who's a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute and the moderator for today's discussion. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and the SETI Institute friends the world over. Thanks for joining us today for today's SETI Talk, Whales, Their Song, Their Culture, Another Intelligence on Earth. I'm Bill Diamond, the CEO of the SETI Institute. For our regular SETI Talks attendees and new guests alike, let me remind you that you can post questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to address as many of them as we can at the end of the panel discussion. We're also going to be using a fun new tool for the Q&A session, and Frank will explain that a bit further. I also want to remind you that we'd love to know where you're joining us from, so please use the chat function and tell us where you are. Before I turn the podium over to Frank, let me remind you that the SETI Talks is a production of the SETI Institute in Mountain View, California. It's made possible by the generous support of people like you. You can learn how to get involved in our mission, support our work, or sign up for our newsletter online at www.seti.org. Today's talk is sponsored by Edward Dower, and his gift to us and to all of you is in memory of Carol Dower, who, Edward says, remains the brightest star in his universe. We're all very grateful to Edward and so pleased to be able to honor and remember Carol through today's conversation. And with that, it's time to turn the proceedings over to Frank for a deep dive to understand one of our planet's most astonishing species. Frank?
Thank you very much, Bill. Hello, everybody. We have more than 400 people watching us live right now, so you are welcome. Today, we are going to talk about whales, a lot of different types of whales. And for this, we invited two renowned scientists, biologists. So let me introduce them briefly. First of all, we have Ellen Garland. Hi, Ellen, how are you? So Ellen completed a PhD in bioacoustic in the Cetacean Ecology and Acoustic Laboratory at the University of Queensland, Australia in 2011. Her research focused essentially on the cultural transmission of humpback whale song, and she studied specifically those in the South Pacific Ocean. In 2015, she was awarded a Royal Society Newton International Fellowship to continue her work on humpback whale song culture at the University of St. Andrews in UK. And then later on, she was also awarded a 5-year Royal Society University Research Fellowship in 2017 to expand her work on song culture, learning, and function. She's going to tell us about the behavior of whales and how we study them by listening to their song. The second speaker is also a biologist. Hi, Shane, how are you? So Shane Guerreau is a Canadian whales biologist whose interest is at the forefront of understanding cetacean society, communication system, and their culture. Shane earned his PhD at Dalhousie University and is currently a scientist in residence at the Ottawa Carleton University. So he's a founder of a lot of different projects that we are going to talk about today. One is the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, but he's also the biology lead for the project SETI that Bill has mentioned previously. And we are going to talk specifically of this project. Shane is a National Geographic explorer. He has done multiple TED Talks. So welcome to both of you. And let's dig into the topic. Let's talk about whales and communication. And Hélène, I know that you have prepared some slides for us.
Yes, I have. So let me try and share my screen. All right. Okay, so that should be coming through now. Let me put that into present mode. Just a moment as my computer cranks into gear. All right, so I'm going to take it away. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview on my work on humpback whale song culture. Now, humpbacks here are baleen whales that grow to about 14 meters in length, and they weigh up to about 30 tons. Humpbacks have a global distribution. So they spend the summer months feeding in polar regions. Each year, they undertake long migrations to their winter breeding grounds where they aggregate around tropical islands and banks to mate and give birth. They show site fidelity to these breeding locations and are more likely to return to the same breeding ground each year than to migrate to a different one. This allows the recognition of a number of groups or populations throughout the world there. Now, as Frank mentioned, my work focuses on populations in the South Pacific, so it's this general area here that I work on. So my research focuses on trying to understand the function and cultural evolution of song. Now, it's only male humpback whales that sing, and song functions in sexual selection through mate attraction or to mediate male-male social interactions, or potentially both as a multi-message signal. We're just not really that sure at the moment. What we do know is the song is highly structured, repetitive, long, and very stereotyped. It's also constantly changing, constantly evolving each year. But you may ask, what is a song? Well, here's an example. So song is structured in what we call a nested hierarchy. The shortest sound to our ear we call a unit, and we name these how they kind of sound, say moans, groans, barks, croaks. You can get very inventive. The top panel you see there is an example of some of the units we have. Then a group of units makes up a phrase, and a few similar phrases makes up a theme. For example, theme 4 here in the second panel. A few different themes comprise a song, and a few songs make up a song session. So themes are sung in the same order, and the same song is repeated many times. At the upper level of the display, different versions of the display containing different themes are called song types. Now, songs can be anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes in length. So hopefully we're just going to listen to one phrase. Now, this is a spectrogram, so frequency, so the pitch is in kilohertz on the y-axis and time in seconds on the x-axis. Now, each dark part is the sound. And for this example, we have a bellows and 3 croaks. And if I'm very lucky, it will play for you. Okay, that might not have been what you were expecting, but that is part of humpback whale song. So we've got our song. Now within a population, all males are singing the same song. We have extremely strong cultural conformity within a population, but the song is also constantly changing from breeding season to breeding season. All males make these changes to maintain the observed conformity. Now, this would appear to be a bit of a paradox to have a display that is both the same and changing. Data indicates that at any point in time within a population, all males are singing the same version of this highly stereotyped display. As changes occur to the structure of the song, males rapidly incorporate these changes into their own display. Then as a whole, the song of the population moves forward in small to large steps, in evolutionary to revolutionary steps. At this upper extreme, we have song revolutions, where the entire song is replaced by a song introduced from a neighboring population. Now, within an ocean basin, population songs are similar, but the similarity depends on the geographic distance among those populations, and it also has a time component to it. So my work in the South Pacific, on the South Pacific song, has described song over an 11-year period. So populations are arranged from west to east across the top, and there's a map down there for reference. Now, each color I'm going to show you represents a different song type, with similar colors representing the evolution of a song type, say from blue through to light blue as one song lineage. So we're going to look first at East Australia. So you can see some similar colors and then some different revolutionary song types in there. So let's look out across the South Pacific region. Now, as you can see, songs spread east from East Australia across to French Polynesia with a 1 to 2 year delay. Now, if we focus on the blue song type here, you can see it spreading in a stepwise fashion across the region. This was then replaced by the dark red song type, which also periodically spread across the region. This dark red song replaced the current blue song in each population along the way. So we have this really dynamic picture of song evolution and cultural transmission across this whole region. So these song revolutions are extraordinary, and it's this feature, this behavior, that makes humpback whale song so unique in the whole animal kingdom. So an entire population, which can contain over 10,000 males, will rapidly and synchronously change their entire song display, which can be up to 30 minutes in length for one song. They will change this to a new song, which has been introduced from a neighboring population. It's like changing your national anthem every 2 to 3 years to something that your neighbor has been singing. And this makes absolutely no sense at all. Birds really don't do this. In fact, the only other animal that makes these kinds of population-wide changes at this vast and rapid pace are humans. So this song display and this dynamic cultural transmission and all these extraordinary features is what I'm trying to understand and study. So that's a whistle-stop tour through song. I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to Frank.
Thank you very much, Helen. Very good summary. So probably some of you know Helen because she's also one of the main scientists in the documentary on Apple TV called Fathom, right? And which describe your research quite well as well. Shane, you are ready to tell us a bit more about sperm whales?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen. All right. Hopefully everyone can see beautiful sperm whales at this point. Sperm whales have been sperm whales for really longer than humans have walked upright. And their brains, like Frank said, are larger than ours, and their bodies bigger than ours too. And in some ways, their stories are far older and literally deeper than our stories. Stories of families like this one, stories of moms like Can Opener here, confronted with a deep and dark and uncertain ocean, and how she overcomes these obstacles by working together to raise and defend her calves, like Hope that's tucked underneath her. And of learning from each other across generations of females. Grandmothers and mothers and daughters will live together for life. See, the sperm whales have figured out something that both they and we pretty much understand, that family is critical to their survival. And since 2005, I've literally spent thousands of hours at sea following these families. And it's really been the first time that anyone's come to know these biblical leviathans as individuals with personalities, as brothers and sisters, and importantly, as mothers and babysitters. And over this time, we've come to understand the details of their lives and communication system in an unprecedented way. So when a sperm whale speaks, it speaks in clicks. These are sort of patterns that are reminiscent of Morse code, and we call those codas. And they appear to use these codas to label their families and communities through sound. They're sort of broadcasting their identity as individuals, as families, and as clans. Families that share the same dialect, the same sets of codas, we call a clan. And Can, Opener, and Hope belong to the Eastern Caribbean clan. And all of the whales in the Eastern Caribbean make this call. It's called a 1+1+3 coda. One plus 1+3 clicks. And this coda is unique to these whales. It's only ever been heard in the Caribbean. And calves seem to take at least 2 years to learn to make it correctly. And they'll actually babble and make different sounds before making this one correctly. Because when two families of sperm whales meet at sea, they need to recognize each other. Because it turns out that sperm whale families in the same clan that speak the same dialect will spend time together, and sperm whale families from different clans that speak different dialects will not. They seem to be able to define us and them. And these whale cultures that sound different, behave differently. It's more than just animals learning from each other, because behavior is what you're doing, but culture is how you've learned to do it. All sperm whales do the same things. They swim around, they hunt for squid, but they seem to do those things differently. Sort of like humans use forks or chopsticks when they're eating, sperm whales differ in what they eat, how fast they travel, where they roam. They differ in their social behavior in probably a myriad of different ways that we don't even understand yet. And that's because each culture, whale or otherwise, is sort of a set of solutions on how to solve the problems about the environment that you live in. And if we lose that, if we lose an entire clan of whales, let's say all of the animals in the Caribbean, an entire culture, we lose all the traditional knowledge of what it means to be a Caribbean sperm whale and the generations of wisdoms on how to survive there. These cultures passed on by generations of moms are a significant reason why we think these animals might be surviving there. And it's really a link between these whales and this place in which they've lived for years. And it's this idea of how whale culture can be a new lens to find familiarity with the lives of whales, but also to allow us to fundamentally restructure large-scale conservation policy to protect the cultural diversity as part of biodiversity. And this project that we're about to submit, called the Global Coda Repertoire Project, seek to describe the geographic extent over which these sperm whale vocal clans exist on a global scale, on a biologically meaningful scale. And this data set will allow us to test all sorts of new hypotheses about the origin of dialects or diffusion or universal and regional coda types, and to understand the function of codas. Because whoa, are you guys getting a broken image here? There.
Yes.
Because while researchers can use these sort of identity cues in their sperm whale codas to discriminate between individuals and families and clans, it doesn't really mean that these codas are salient to the whales like Hope in the same way. In reality, we don't really know very much at all about the function of individual calls or what information it might share between two whales, if at all. And to address that, I have a new team of collaborators who have just launched a new initiative to decipher coda communication called Project SETI. It's inspired by large data-driven collaborations like LIGO or the Hadron Collider or the Human Genome Project, all of which required a big community and diversity of expertise to undertake. And then in some ways, the spin-offs of those programs were even more important than the initial goal. On the whole, SETI has 3 components. The first is to build a capacity to record the ocean and the whales in an unprecedented way, and to create one of the largest libraries of sperm whale vocalizations in existence. And to do that, we're going to build on what we know from the sperm whales in Dominica and develop technologies to listen to them and to put their sounds into context of their behavior and social lives. This data will be pipelined to a team of scientists who will process and analyze it using cutting-edge machine learning methods and others, but also to build tools to automate this analysis so that studying whale communication takes massively less time, reduces the number of expert hours needed to invest and validate what we're trying to understand, and really to make these tools and methods and data available open and free to others. And so that will bring us hopefully to a stage where we can create a more predictive coda model and try and understand what's going to be said next in order to build better hypotheses to undertake interactive playback experiments with the whales, because that's really the only way of grounding what we think might be true of how these animals are using it and what they might be sharing with each other. Now, clearly, that's a really big roadmap, and we've only just begun. But SETI is really this lifetime opportunity, and its main goal of understanding communication of whales is definitely a moonshot, but I'm excited to be a part of it. And I hope that inspires us to build sort of bigger definitions of us, to include our neighbors in our successes, and to protect our shared planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. Very nice introduction to the topic. I mean, I must confess that we have been trying to get this kind of talk for quite a long time. So I'm very glad you are here to talk about that today. So I just want to say that I lied before. We have more than 540 people watching us now live from all the continents, from different countries, and Bill will mention that later at the end of this talk. Let's go to the science and let's talk a bit more about the science itself and the way you study those whales and more. One of the questions that's been coming a lot when watching those whale documentaries is that why those animals have such a complex communication system? Is that something coming from the biology, from the fact that they have a huge brain, or is that something coming from the environment into which they live? My question would be basically, why do you think whales are so complex to communicate and not dogs or sheep on Earth? Ellen, you want to take this first?
Well, I mean, I deal with a complex display, but it's not that complex, I guess, is the difference between it. So I only deal with a sexual display. It's only the males that are making these, singing these songs, but it is very complex in the structure and the hierarchy, and there's many levels within it to make it a lot more complex and allow a lot of different sound types to be used and a little bit of variation to be put into that, and a little bit of change, and everything can sort of evolve along the way. So yes, that particular display is more governed by, the males are, at least in my opinion, singing to the females to try and attract in a mate, and there may be some information for fellow males in that call, in that song, but there is this ability to make it very complex. You can have sort of sometimes between 4 and 8 to 10 themes in there. So you've got a huge variety of components, and then a huge variety of sounds that can go within that. And so we don't know exactly how the females may be using the song, if they're using the song, and actually looking into this function to look at maybe there's been this runaway evolution. So it's sort of getting even more and more complex there. It's like a acoustic peacock tail, basically, what's going on potentially with the song. So it's kind of on this runaway trajectory that the more exciting and different it gets, perhaps that's signaling a better mate. But I can hand over to Shane to talk a bit more about the sperm whale side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Yeah, I mean, complexity is a funny word, right? I mean, that's like as a scientist, it's so hard to apply like a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equals complexity. I think the way I think about it, or at least I try to, is like they're doing complicated things. I think we're beyond this whole sort of behavior is driven by genetics and it's an immediate stimulus and response scenario. For why whales, I think they have complicated behavior, and in the case of the sperm whales, they have really complicated social lives, or at least the need to sort of potentially classify or understand who's with them and who's with us. And so like a natural way to take care of that is to mediate that through sound, right? To potentially label identity of different groups. At least, in order for that to be true in humans, that's one way that we would do it, right? Either by a symbol or a sound, their behavior strikes me as, their identity as being important to them. The dolphins label each other with signature whistles. The sperm whales appear to do that with codas. The humpbacks on a much larger scale at the population level use these songs to at least you allow us to define groups. So I guess I would say, like in the ocean, sound makes sense. So like from why use sound for communicating things, it's the best thing to do in a medium that gets very hard to see through after a few hundred meters. And why the complexity in the whales is, well, I think they're big brain mammals that do complicated things, and so there was a potential need to have some kind of system to share that information. But again, complexity is always a tricky word.
Yeah. Okay, I just remind our viewers that we are going to take your questions in a few minutes, probably in half hour, in 25 minutes. And if you can write your question in the Q&A, and also if you like a question, you could vote the question up. This way we see it and we will prioritize it. Shane, you mentioned that whales have been on this planet way before the humanoid, right? Maybe you can remind the numbers. So can we say that whales, these are in fact the first intelligent species on our own planet?
Wow. Again, it will come down to what you want to talk about intelligence. I think humans are the first ones to have human intelligence. I think whales are intelligent in all sorts of ways. Are they going to pass an IQ test? Absolutely not. They're not going to order shapes, not without a very arbitrary captive sort of test, maybe. Dolphins pass mirror self-recognition, which is viewed as a way to look at intelligence. I mean, yeah, I mean, if you want to go to the raw sort of like they had big, cerebrally complicated brains before we did, then yeah, but what does that mean for 50 million years later now is a big question. I think the need to categorize these ones are and those ones are not in terms of species runs us into all sorts of risks when trying to protect an ecosystem as a whole. But yeah, I mean, they had big complicated brains before the primates did, if that's like a flag that we're going to plant on their behalf.
But the reason I'm asking this question, and that's for Ellen, is because imagine that an alien listened to our planet, and for some reason they only listen to the ocean, right? So they will hear those noises, those songs, and they will see this evolution of the songs over time that you mentioned. So they will say there is intelligence on this planet because of that, right? So those songs are not a proof of intelligence, but an indication of intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely culturally learning. They will switch their display, so the population will sing their song and all of the intricacies of that, and then they will vocally learn the neighboring population songs. So they have to come into contact at some point in their big migrations, whether it's down on the feeding grounds. Sometimes the feeding grounds can overlap between a couple of populations, or on migration, some of the migratory streams will overlap or be together on the way. I always think up, because southern hemisphere up to the breeding grounds, but to the tropics and then back down again. So they have this amazing ability to hear another whole display and learn it, but they learn it in segments. So some of the research that I've been doing is looked into how they would learn a new song, and we found what we call hybrid songs. We think we've got a recording of a whale in the middle of learning a new song, so it's got singing parts of an old song and parts of a new song, and they segment it at the theme level. So they will take out one theme and put it in. And so we don't know whether they do this sequentially for all the themes, or you're dropping out a theme, or that's the end of the process. But we found themes of one song in the old song and in the new song. So it's like in the process of changing. We don't actually know how long it takes them to switch. We think it's a few weeks to go from one to the other. We don't know how many whales they have to hear, whether they have to hear the song multiple times from the same whale or different whales. But these are the kinds of questions that I'm really interested in. But it's this sort of segmentation of a display, and that's kind of akin to how birds learn their songs, and potentially how infants learn language little segments. So it's these kind of underlying learning aspects that may hint at, intelligence, all of these other loaded words that we have in our vernacular. And so, we do have these interesting indications of how they're vocally learning these different displays.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, Ellen. I hadn't heard about that hybrid song. That's awesome. I hope I get to hear it one day.
So you never heard sperm whale practicing the coda of another plant just to mimic them?
Yeah, well, so part of the problem in the ocean, and I want to get back to what your question initially, but to answer this one directly, is that it's so big and the whales move so far. And so like just being there when these two families meet, for one, just to happen upon that occurring, but two, to be able to record on the scale over which that happens, right? So they don't have to touch faces to be able to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
The codas can travel several kilometers. Our ability to record that far might not be true. So they might be having that interaction over scales larger than we are able to address it, right? We need to be able to record across tens of kilometers potentially to be able to get at that. But on the baby side, yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear from the data that we have now in Dominica that there is this like sort of learning process that takes time, as Ellen was saying. But to go back to your initial question, I think, Ellen and I are those aliens in some sense. We spend a lot of time listening to the ocean and we're like, hey, wow, look at this structure. It's fascinating. There's something going on here, thermodynamics tells us that structure is expensive. Like there's a reason it's there. It's not, it just doesn't, So, I think, I think the reason we found clans was because this biologist named Luke Rendell and my PhD supervisor, Hal Whitehead, they heard this thing that overlapped well with this social segregation, so they found one structure in the social side and one structure on the acoustic side, and those layered very well. And that, so that's the process that we're doing. So yeah, I think if someone even farther out of this world listened to the ocean, they would be fascinated by the structures they find there. And the big question that all of this hangs on is, of course, like, are the whales using all of this in the way that we think they are?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the hardest one to ask, because then, it's not about human in the loop, it's about, whale in the loop questions. And that's fascinating and really hard.
Yeah, you need to start thinking like a whale to really understand what exactly they try to convey with those songs and click and codas.
Yeah.
Before we go through this, because that's the project SETI I want to dig into, I'm very curious. Could you tell us a bit about your career? How did you choose to become biologist interested in whales? Is that a story? Each of you. Helen, you want to start since you're on mute?
Sure. So I think I always really wanted to study whales and dolphins. I was that kid. And so I was always really excited and really interested in biology and the sea. I grew up in New Zealand, so we were always around water a lot, mostly rivers and lakes, but I really was always fascinated. And I think once I got into university, I kind of worked out it was behavior. It was animal behavior that I really was enjoying. And then I kind of fell into animal communication and acoustics. So I did a little project on birdsong and found I was quite good at discriminating sound types, which, is pretty helpful because I spend most of my time listening to lots of different sounds and categorizing them. I spend hours listening. But it was this initial love of the ocean, wanted to be a marine biologist, fascinated by behavior, it turned out, and just kind of went down that track and keep pursuing the dream, I guess. It's a challenging field to be in. I ended up going to Australia to do my PhD from New Zealand because I found a fantastic supervisor and a fantastic project with what seemed like a great adventure to island hop across the South Pacific and help amazing collaborators record whale song in multiple island groups, which seemed great. But I was really lucky that there was this huge historical data set because of the South Pacific Whale Research Consortium. So a big group of friends who got together and share and collaborate at this big ocean basin scale. So there was a lot of data collected to begin with. And I honestly started with my PhD supervisor, who was Mike Note, handing me a box of tapes and saying, here's your PhD, it's in here. Which, you know, is a normal kind of way to start, but it's been those kind of, that love of the ocean and the passion to keep going, and then getting my teeth into this amazing project and sort of discovering this big transmission network, which we had no idea was there. Like, we had no idea. That was not supposed to be the result. My PhD sort of went, halfway through, we were like, oh, what on earth is happening here? So it was just kind of this journey, and I've always sort of followed the data, and I found weird things along the way. I found one of the hybrid songs, which my PhD supervisor had seen what he called intermediate songs beforehand, and he was the one that coined the song revolutions coming from West Australia into East Australia. That was his work, that was his PhD, and I kind of extended it across the South Pacific. So we have this massive network, because that spread starts from West Australia so far. It goes West Australia, East Australia, and then across the South Pacific. So I've always followed the data. Weird is good. I always tell my students, weird is good. If you find something weird, if you hear something weird in the data, just stop, make a note, because weird is good. And that's what I wrote the hybrid work out of. Just this weird thing where I was sitting going, what is happening? It's the old song, new song, it's the old song. I don't understand, but that's great. So I'll stop there and hand over to Shane.
Yeah, I mean, my story mirrors in some way. You know, my favorite animal when I was a kid was the killer whale. You know, they're big on Canada's west coast, of course. And, you know, I grew up wanting to be marine biologist and to follow whales. And, you know, I was really lucky to have two super supportive parents to enable me to do all the amazingly nerdy things that I did as a kid that led me to where I am today. And I think, you know, it says something to parents who are listening now, or maybe there's kids, although I guess they're still in school, hopefully. You know, Ellen's example of like, they just discovered this massive thing, totally, I don't want to say unintentionally, it was a lot of work, of course, but like not what they had set out to do. And I think that's one of the amazing things about, you know, whale biology or just ocean research, and I'm sure it's the same with space, is when you stop to listen or to take a picture, you never know what you're going to find out. And it's very different, I think, in that respect. You know, so that's really exciting. I think I've had a different trajectory than most people in academia, because, you know, for the last number of years, I've kind of been academic, but not academic. I'm not a tenured faculty member. You know, someone once described me as someone who builds families, in that, like, I went and started this project and built up all these people who thought the project was fascinating, and built a team of biologists who wanted to study them. And in doing so, we sort of defined all of these amazing sperm whale families that we've been following over the years. So I kind of like that as an idea. You know, I moved between countries when I was a kid, and so always needed to sort of make new friends. And so I kind of like that description of, it's just always fascinated me, like, why social groups exist, and sort of tragically now what happens when they start falling apart. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Ellen, to hear that it's also a childhood passion of yours. That's fascinating. Nice.
Yeah, in fact, biologists are like astronomers. It's a passion that we basically transform into a job later on. I have a lot of questions, so let's go through some of them and get some answers which are short as possible, if you can. I'm really interested to kind of discuss a little bit more about the project SETI with a C. Let's start with you, Shane. So this is a very ambitious project, okay? There is a lot of partners here. There is different technology being used, including recording of the behavior of whales to kind of put together this behavior with the sound that they make. What's the state of the project right now? And do you have funding? Where exactly is going to be this first instruments, and what kind of instruments?
Yeah, so the project's been running sort of officially for just over a year. We are a TED Audacious project, so we've been funded through that program, and we're very grateful to the funders. The main part of the listening system, so we're implementing a large-scale buoyed hydrophone array across tens of kilometers off the coast of Dominica. And that should be going in the water. It's being developed by an amazing team at University of Haifa, and then built in Texas, actually. And it's going to go in the water this summer. And the idea will be that 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, we'll be recording and able to localize sperm whales as they swim in 3D off the coast of Dominica. So these are animals we know well. We know the families well. For a lot of them, we know what codas they use and don't use. And now we'll be able to record them on a regular basis. And the idea there is that we get a much larger data set. The head of machine learning is talking about on the order of, 1 billion to 4 billion clicks, which, gets us closer to these like large scale GPT machine learning level data sets. And so that we can actually start to apply things. And then the question becomes, well, how do we connect that with behavior? And so that becomes, how do we monitor the animals' movements and the animals' behavior in a more systematic way to pair with this continuous audio? And that's where the novel technology in terms of drones and tags comes into play, and bringing those two together to eventually be able to create more constructive interactive playbacks to ground any kind of the hypothesis that come from that. So it's new, it's starting. It'll really get started this summer when the big base listening stations go in off the coast of Dominica. And we're so grateful to be working with the government of Dominica there. And of course, I've been there for a long time, but this is a much bigger deal because we're implementing physical structure into those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Hélène, is this something that you could benefit for your research, or are you planning to same kind of project for the humpback whale, or the population is too spread around? Is that something that you could do for your own research with this, being inspired by the project SETI?
It sounds like an amazing project, Shane. I'm really excited to hear more about it. So yeah, I mean, so with my work, it's more multiple populations, and I have amazing collaborators in each of the island groups. So as I always say, well, at the start, I was just the crazy PhD student that decided they wanted to work on this. So we have collaborators in different areas, and sometimes we have long-term recorders deployed, so autonomous recorders that we anchor on the seafloor, and then other locations they do have big buoy arrays to be able to track the humpbacks moving through the region, and those are for particular projects that are led by other researchers in the group. So there's lots of potential for this, and having a big hydrophone array is very, very challenging, but it's absolutely fantastic for localizing, for knowing where your animal is in the water, so you can pair those visuals. Sometimes we have a hill team looking down on the whales and seeing where they are in the area. So like we can hear a song absolutely crystal clear for 10 kilometers around a whale when they're singing. A little bit further as it starts to drop out, depending on the transmission. So these are big scale experience. You've got to think big when you start thinking about the world under the water there. We don't think about a kilometer or two. We're thinking about being up the hill and looking down over a 20-30 kilometer area to be able to see who's in the area, who can hear all of these aspects. I'm super jealous at how awesome this project sounds. So I'll let Shane go for it. If you happen to get any humpback recordings, let me know.
We will absolutely get humpback whale recordings. I think for me, it's really important that SETI decentralizes, right? Like when we went to the moon, and I don't compare us to Apollo clearly, but 12 people got to walk around up there, and it's amazing, and all sorts of things came back, obviously, and we learned so much about the moon. But like everyone has seen Velcro, right? And I think or all of the freeze drying techniques about food and these things that society benefited from. And my immediate hope is that like a lot of having all of these amazing machine learning leaders in their own right in the machine learning world, right? They're not, biologists like Ellen and I who have learned machine learning in order to apply them to things that we do, turn their gaze for a while on how do we record and understand the ocean in a scale that we can conduct these kinds of things, and then have that off spin. Of course, it needs to be trained for different species and so on, but all of these things that I think are going to be off spins that I hope are useful to my field and just listening to the ocean in general.
Before taking questions from people, we have a lot of them, just so you know. I want to talk about conservation a bit, because that's a very interesting problem. In fact, I'm old enough to remember the time where it was announced that we have less than 500 whales, humpback whales in the Southern Atlantic. So, and now the population has grown. I don't know the exact number, but I read around that there is more than 50,000 humpback whales in the Atlantic. So the population is back. So Hélène, I'm very curious to know, do you think there is an impact in the fact that we went from 400 whales to 50,000 whales into your research? And what will it be? Could you, maybe, is this kind of activity, song activity related to that?
Yeah, so that has been one of my big questions and something we've just looked into, because it's fascinating, these types of spreads. So yes, there are very low population numbers around the world, and they've increased in some places and actually not in others. The South Pacific is still listed as endangered, so those populations haven't recovered in the South Pacific. The east coast of Australia, that's recovering strongly. So there is this variety, I'd like to point out, around the world. So it's not just everything's fine and dandy. But what's really interesting is in the southern hemisphere, we have these song revolutions where the song is passed from one population to the next. In the northern hemisphere, and the more typical is just the song evolution. So within an ocean basin, all the populations will share their song. So they'll share it to various amounts. So like most of the song, half the song, and it will be based on shared themes, so shared components. It's in the South Pacific where they pass these whole displays, one population to the next. We didn't realize this. So we started modeling this. So I started a great new collaboration during lockdown with some birdsong cultural evolution modelers down at London Holloway. I'm going to get in trouble for that. And so basically we adapted their cultural evolution birdsong model for whale song. So we just sort of changed some of the components. And what we did is we put in all the parameters for the number of populations in the Southern Hemisphere, and then population sizes from whaling through to where they are today. And we had the geographical spacing of them as well. And then we just let it loose with some parameters, say that they like to learn new songs, they have a bit of a song memory, they can remember what they've previously been singing, and we varied that for 1 to 5 years, so we can see how long they could remember. And then we had the increases in populations. And so we just let it loose with this and saw what we got. And that, just with those simple parameters and simple learning rules, we got song revolutions to start. And they spread from west to east with the current population sizes. So we could start these big song revolutions. And then we decided to run it for 500 years past it, because why not? I want to know what happens. And so basically, once the song revolution starts, it'll just keep on passing, and then it'll peter out again. And then there'll be just a period of evolution, and then one will kick up again. And so this was just our first attempt. And then we used the same learning parameters and applied it to the Northern Hemisphere populations, which don't have these song revolutions. And with the same parameters, we got song evolutions to occur but not song revolutions. So it seems like there's the same learning parameters, the same learning mechanisms happening around the globe, but it's really to do with geography and population size that may trigger these song revolutions. So this is our first go at this. And so it's kind of interesting and something I really want to develop over the next few years. That's kind of where I'm hoping my research goes if they talk to me after screwing up the university name.
Could I just add something to that?
Yes, I'm curious. You mentioned I would like you to tell us the status of the sperm whales conservation, because we don't know much about those. So maybe go ahead.
Yeah, globally, we don't have a really good idea of the trajectory, and in part that's because the data, sperm whale data, is lacking in a lot of the world. I just wanted to sort of, so the answer is we don't know globally what their trajectory is. We do know in some places around the world, and I think that's what I wanted to echo about what Ellen said, is that these, when we say the humpback whales are recovering, you got to say, well, which humpback whales? And I think that's why that was one of the main impetuses for this global coded dialect project, is like, well, what are the subdivisions that we know that exist? If we can use the sounds they make, and that reflects their actual social divisions, and we know the social divisions mean different behavior sets, then this is a structure that exists in the ocean that the animals at least appear to define amongst themselves. So that's probably the layer at which we should be doing conservation and management, right? So the hope is that this project provides this big map and says, these are the management units. We need to protect this cultural diversity because it's so intertwined with the environment in which those animals are living, in that the sperm whales of Western Australia sound different than the sperm whales off Sri Lanka, and they sound different from the sperm whales in the Azores and the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And so those subsets need to be treated differently and use culture as a boundary rather than just genetics, right? Because we know sperm whales are sperm whales pretty much on a global scale, in the same way that humans are humans on a global scale. But I think that we fail to define human diversity if we just say that. And I think we fail to define cetacean diversity if we just say, humpbacks or sperm whales or sperm whales. And that's where I think the conservation comes out of the communication side. I mean, will we ever know if a sperm whale from the Caribbean sees themselves as different than a sperm whale from the Med? That's a big outstanding question. But certainly humans ascribe a lot of meaning to those differences, perhaps too much these days. And so we need to reflect that in the way that we manage and protect them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start putting into our conversation some questions from the audience, and we have one which is related to what you just said, Shane. A lot of people are curious to know if whales could kind of communicate with each other, even if they are not from the same species. Have you seen this? The sounds are very different, but is there a common whale language across the Pacific, or some kind of way for them to interact?
I mean, we see a lot of different species clearly interacting. I mean, there's a video going around the internet right now of a humpback whale and a dolphin doing spirals together. There's no way that they're not sort of aware that there is another animal there. Are they able to speak to each other? That's a really good question. The simplified version I often get asked is, can sperm whales from different clans understand each other? And I think it depends on how you define understand, right? I mean, males from the Caribbean might move all over the ocean, and they're clearly breeding with females that speak a different coda dialect. So on some sense, there's an understanding of, I'm here to mate, whether that's communicated through sound and the information shared in that sound is really hard to know. I wouldn't think that we know of any evidence of a universal sort of rubric that goes from bottlenose dolphin to humpback whale to sperm whale to, deep diving animal. I think the more interesting question that we're asking in sperm whales right now is, what is a universal coda type across all of these global clans, and what are the unique ones, and why and how those patterns might exist? And I think that mirrors a lot of what Ellen's doing, and she's found this remarkable pattern of song moving across the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So
Ellen, do you want to add something about this, or I go to the next question?
No, I mean, I agree with Shane. I mean, sometimes maybe with some of the delphinids, the dolphins, they have mixed species pods. So there's a lot of whistling happening in there, and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between this species whistles and that species whistles. So there is potential for those closer related species, possibly in the dolphins and the delphinids, to have this potential for interaction. But between maybe a sperm whale and a humpback, I think that would be a stretch. Of course, they'll be aware of each other there, and I see humpbacks interacting, or at least next to big pods of different dolphins on their breeding grounds, because sometimes humpbacks are just hanging out singing, or they're just hanging out, and there's a giant pod of or a big mega pod of dolphins or super pod of dolphins around as well, and there could be multiple species in that, so they'll be aware of each other. But the amount of communication among species, well, that's a very open question. And you're also got to think about the hearing range. Are they communicating in the same bands so that they can actually hear each other? If you've got the really high frequency, some of the dolphin sound, perhaps some of the bigger lower frequency sound animals may not be hearing up into those upper reaches, so they may not actually have overlapping there. There are, of course, large overlaps depending on your species, but yeah, you've got to think that not everything is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. In fact, that's perfect transition for the next question. We have a lot of people who ask, how those whales physically do this sound? What exactly are they? Do they have their larynx? What is moving, and how far can they hear each other?
Okay, so sperm whales have this remarkable system that's a lot like all the toothed whales. This is actually great because we have a humpback, and which is a baleen whale, and then a sperm whale, which is a toothed whale. But the toothed whales, they move air between two balloons, kind of back and forth, and in between there's a little what's called the phonic lips that opens and closes, and that clapping of the air moving between the two balloons basically makes a click. And in the case of the sperm whale, that goes through the spermaceti organ and then out the junk, and it kind of gets directionalized and sort of amplified along the way. So the clicks they're making by moving air around in half of their nose. They have one blowhole, but they do have two nasal passages, one for breathing and one for making clicks. But that's different in the humpbacks.
This is where I get super jealous of anyone that worked with the toothed whales and dolphins, because you know so much more about exactly what's happening. So with the big baleen whales, they're quite hard to study. They're quite hard to get a head into an MRI machine to get a lot of scans, and you can dissect and all those kind of amazing things. At the moment, we think that air is moved around the nasal passages. So when humpbacks sing, they're head down, tail up, and no air comes out. They will sing and hang there in the water about 20 meters below the surface, and they'll go around their song cycle, and then they may come up for a breath, but no air exits during that time. So we think the air is being passed around in or out, and there is different folds that we believe are vibrating. This is a really open question, exactly how the sound is being produced, and hopefully we'll be getting a lot more information over the coming years. So that's the beauty with cetacean biology. You may think we know a lot, but we're only sort of scratching the surface. And baleen whale anatomy, particularly how they make sound, is one of those really big regions that we're really hoping to get a lot more answers. But yeah, sound, the air moving around the different nasal cavities is what we think currently is how they make the sounds, and a whole variety of them, at least 40 different sound types.
I have two more questions. One of them, I want a very brief answer from you. What is the most extraordinary behavior you have seen by studying those whales? Something that makes you think that we have just started scratching the surface of the complex communication. What's the memory? Something that came to your mind right now. Elaine, you want to start?
Yeah, suddenly putting the whole pattern together and seeing these big cultural phenomena spread across the South Pacific. I coded from east to west, so I didn't put it together until I had the whole pattern. And it was just, I know, and it just hit me when I had it all lined up. I had them all lined up on the floor with all the different songs from each of the populations, and it was just there. And that was definitely a wow moment.
What about you, Shen?
Yeah, I mean, I have two. The first one, I think, was the first time that we had our own little skiff off Dominica, and we sat for about 45 minutes beside two calf sperm whales that were just essentially continuously making codas. And we knew, that they were offspring of different moms, but they were always together. And it was hard not to go, there's something more going on here. This isn't just randomly making noise. There's no way that they're not sending and receiving, like that. It was this, not an exchange, not a duet, not a, the second one, I think, is that, we had a couple of animals, in particular, one can opener, actually, the female from the talk, who figured out our system. So when a whale dives, it lifts its tail, it dives, we go to where the whale just was, we record, we collect skin and feces and so on. And she would figure that out. And she would fake a dive and wait about 10 meters below the surface and blow out all these bubbles, and then come to the surface and roll her eye out of the water and look at the people, not the boat. And like, as a scientist, I can't show any of that. But to me, like, it's like she saw something new, she learned the pattern, she predicted what might happen, it did happen, and then, was intelligent enough to know that the boat wasn't the cool part. So that inspires all of these open questions, like all of those steps are internal to the whale and really hard to observe. And so that makes me very excited about what the future of whale science might be.
Well, excellent transition for my last question. Let's imagine we're traveling in the future, utopian future, and we have a way to communicate with those whales. What will be the question you will ask them? I have the same question as an astronomer for aliens, so that's why I'm asking you this for the whales. What will be the question you will ask to a humpback whale, Ellen?
Well, my first thing is to take a step back and say, should we be asking them a question, or should we be listening to what they say?
Good answer.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that you say that, because that is literally my question. I think I think we fail to deliver on that promise by not listening first. And I think, we often get asked, well, what are you going to say to sperm whales, for Project SETI? And I think it misses the mark about how important all of the work that Ellen and I and all the marine mammal people have done, and I'm sure the astronomers think the same way, is that, we have spent a lot of time listening, and it would seem insane to speak first if that ever happened. So, yeah, I think Ellen, I'm sure, will echo that we have learned so much about how to be better people by trying to understand what it means to be a whale. And so if we ever get the actual chance, I think it would be total hubris of us to say, hey, what do you think about boats, or whatever we might come up with, and to instead just listen to what they might want to tell us.
All right, thank you very much to both of you for participating to this SETI talk. It was great to talk to you and to talk more about your research and whales. And I see that Bill is back. So Bill, you can take over. You're muted.
Unmute successful. All right. Anyway, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Frank and Ellen and Shane. Really an amazing, enlightening conversation. And thanks to all of you out there for your great questions. And I'm, like always, I'm sorry we can't address each and every one of them, but unanswered questions are just opportunities for further investigation. So as a suggestion, if you have a question we didn't have time to address, see what you can do to find the answer with your own research. And of course, there is an amazing connection between this kind of research and the study of whale communications and astrobiology and the work of the SETI Institute. So wonderful to have SETI with a C meeting SETI with an S. Our own Lawrence Doyle, as I'm sure Ellen and Shane know, is applying information theory to the communication and vocalizations of humpback whales to look for the underlying mathematics or syntax that may belie the presence of information being transmitted by by vocalizations or other means. So it's really an extraordinary field of interest. Once more, we reached a global audience today. We had guests from over 30 different states and more than 30 different countries. We were joined by a mixed age classroom from Nova Scotia. We had an observatory and nature center in California joining us. We even had somebody on a sailboat in Guadalupe. And we also had a guest who claimed they were from the future. So it's good to know we have a future. I'm curious to know how far into the future they were from, because that would maybe give us some hope. Anyway, it's wonderful to see so much interest in whales and to have the opportunity to explore their connection to the search for life beyond Earth. And once again, this worldwide community proves that curiosity unites us all as human beings, regardless of our language, our gender, our race, ethnicity, or indeed, regardless of our intelligence being human and natural or augmented in some ways. So really wonderful. States we had represented today included Washington, Indiana, California, Illinois, Florida, Wisconsin, Hawaii, Minnesota, Montana, Pennsylvania, Texas, Colorado, Tennessee, New York, Connecticut, Louisiana, Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, Oregon, Maryland, Washington, D.C., North Carolina, Massachusetts, Missouri, Alabama, New Mexico, Wyoming, New Jersey, and Arizona. Would have taken me less time to name the states that weren't present today, but we're making progress on all 50. We had people from all over the world joining us, including from Wales and Paraguay, England, India, New Zealand, Australia, Mexico, Portugal, Brazil, France, Germany, Sweden, Belgium, Slovenia, Poland, Colombia, the Netherlands, Canada, Russia, Dominica, Spain, South Africa, Ireland, Venezuela, Argentina, Latvia, Chile, the Czech Republic, Egypt, and Romania. So we really reached a global audience today. Our next goal is 50 countries and all 50 states. So if you have curious and inquisitive friends in distant lands or states that we didn't mention, let them know about SETI Talks, and let's bring even more people together from the world over to be part of our community. So before closing today's discussion, just another reminder that SETI Talks is a production of the SETI Institute in Mountain View, California. We are a nonprofit research and education institution whose mission is to lead humanity's quest to understand the origins and prevalence of life and intelligence in the universe, and to share this knowledge with the world. Our SETI Talks lecture series is supported in part by donations from the public, from friends of science like you, and we bring these lectures and other events to you at no cost, but we're very grateful for any and all donations that allow us to continue bringing the stories of extraordinary science and exploration to you. So you can join our community and be part of the quest. You can visit us at SETI.org for more information, or to make a donation if you're so inclined. Sign up for our monthly science newsletter we call Journey. And thanks again to all of you for being with us today, and to our moderator, Frank, and for our guest speakers, Ellen and Shane. Thanks as well to our friend Edward Dower for sponsoring this conversation. And I want to thank Rebecca, Simon, Lee, and Jasmine at the SETI Institute who make this series possible. Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel and tour the amazing array of lectures. This lecture will also be on our YouTube channel, so you can see it again later and share it with your friends. Plenty of videos and lectures and presentations on our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in sponsoring a SETI Talks event, just contact us to learn more. The email address for this would be info@seti.org with an S, not a C. Remember that the work we do at the SETI Institute is for all humankind. So don't just stand by and watch. You can come and join us at SETI.org and get involved. The search for life beyond Earth is a journey of ultimate discovery, and we invite you to come along. Thanks for being with us today, and we'll see you again next month. Take care.